Our next arthropod-borne disease is river blindness. River blindness is caused by another filarial roundworm. The disease arthropod vector in this case is a black fly, which lives primarily in fertile riverbanks in fast-flowing rivers and streams. When the black fly bites, larval worms are deposited under the skin. The larvae mature into adult roundworms about a year later and live for as long as 14 years, during which time they migrate throughout the body, causing rashes, intense itching, depigmentation of the skin, and nodules that form around the adult worms. Some migrate into the eyes and invade the cornea, causing blindness. This occurs about 1 to 3 years after injection of the larvae by the black flies. Diagnosis is difficult. Presence of nodules under the skin is a good diagnostic tool. Several antihelminthic drugs are available to treat this infection. Next, let's take a look at direct contact helminth infections, including hookworm disease. In the United States, rural areas of the South were at one point in time burdened with hookworm disease, a disease that saps the strength of those infected. Incidence of this major parasitic disease has markedly declined as the result of improved sanitation, particularly the installation of indoor plumbing, and the use of wearing shoes. Hookworm disease is caused by two roundworms. Ancylostoma duodenale is found in the Mediterranean countries, Iran, India, Pakistan, and the Far East, whereas Necator americanus is found in North, Central, and South America, and also Indonesia and the South Pacific and parts of India. Infection occurs by direct contact with soil contaminated with hookworm larvae while walking around barefoot, touching the soil with bare hands, or accidentally swallowing bits of contaminated soil. After 4 to 10 days, the larvae reach infective stage and penetrate the skin. They are carried to the lungs where they are coughed up and swallowed, reaching the intestinal tract in about a week. In the small intestine, the larvae develop into half-inch long adult worms. The mature adult worms live and mate attached to the wall of the small intestine and produce thousands of eggs which are passed in the feces. The eggs ultimately reach the soil, completing the life cycle. Person-to-person contact is not possible because development of the larvae must be in the soil as part of the life cycle. The adult worms have mouth parts called biting plates, by which they attach and suck blood, causing anemia, protein deficiency, and fatigue. In children, continual infection can result in stunted growth and developmental learning disabilities as a result of blood loss. The severity of symptoms appears to be directly related to the hookworm load. Fewer than 25 worms don't usually cause disease, whereas 500 to 1,000 hookworms can be fatal. Diagnosis of hookworm is confirmed by the presence of eggs in a fecal sample. Thankfully, there is medication available for treatment. Strongyloidiasis is caused by the nematode Strongyloides stercoralis, sometimes called threadworm because of its very small size. Around 30 to 100 million people globally are infected with this helminth. Females produce eggs by parthenogenesis, a unique process of reproduction that does not require fertilization by males. Infective larvae in the soil penetrate the skin and are sequentially transported by blood to the heart, lungs, and bronchial tree into the pharynx, where they are coughed up and swallowed, finally reaching the small intestine. There they mature into adult female worms and produce eggs. This can result in a repeated cycle called autoinfection, a process when a person can have a persistent infection for over 20 years, even if they're in an area where a parasite is no longer present. Further autoinfection can result in hyperinfection when the parasite is disseminated throughout the body. The free-living life cycle is an alternative strategy. It results from the passage of eggs in the feces that develop into free-living roundworms that produce large numbers of infected larvae. These infections can be mild and go unnoticed, but in cases of hyperinfection, can be severe, resulting in nausea, vomiting, anemia, weight loss, and chronic bloody diarrhea. Definitive diagnosis is done by looking for larvae in the feces. A much more common infection is pinworm. Pinworm, also known as enterobiasis, is the most common helminthic disease in the United States, with an estimated 40 million people infected. Enterobius vermicularis is a white roundworm that is the length of a staple and is the result of pinworm disease. The adult male and female worms live and mate in the infected person's intestine. At night, while the person sleeps, egg-bearing females exit through the anus and deposit as many as 15,000 eggs around the skin in the anal area and then die. Egg laying is triggered by the lower temperature outside of the body. Infective larvae develop within the eggs in about 4 hours. The eggs can then be swallowed and hatched in the intestine, releasing the larvae that mature into adults and become established in the intestine. The interval form of ingestion of larvae to egg-producing females is about 1 month. Self-infection is a common mode of transmission, particularly in children. Pinworms cause an intolerable itch, resulting in intense scratching around the anal region. Eggs cling to the fingers and are lodged under fingernails and then are swallowed, reinitiating infection. Further, an infected person can transfer eggs through direct contact, on bedclothes, or even by inhalation of airborne eggs. Anal itching, restlessness, and loss of appetite are common and relatively mild symptoms of the disease. This disease is rarely debilitating. Diagnosis is based on the Scotch tape test, where a piece of tape is applied to the anal region during the night or early morning hours. If eggs are present, they stick to the tape and are identified under a microscope. Treatment involves a two-dose course of anti-helminthic drugs and with very little side effects. Schistosomiasis is even more common worldwide and is much more debilitating. In 2016, the World Health Organization estimated more than 200 million people had treatment for schistosomiasis, and there were 89 million people were reported to have been treated for an active infection. Schistosomiasis occurs in Africa, South America, the Caribbean, Middle East, and Far East. These parasites are trematode worms, which are frequently called blood flukes. Certain species of freshwater snails serve as intermediate hosts in these geographical regions. They release immature, free-swimming, microscopic forms of blood flukes called cercariinae, resembling immature tadpoles that survive in the water for about 48 hours. Exposure to infested water containing cercariinae allows their penetration into the skin. Penetration into the skin is followed by migration into blood vessels and in about a week entrance into the liver, where the flukes achieve sexual maturity. Female blood flukes reside in a groove inside the body of the larger male, and the two remain entwined as a mating pair for up to 10 years. The pair migrate into the small veins, called venules, of the intestinal tract or of the bladder. The trematode worms there feed on blood, and the females produce eggs within several weeks. The eggs are discharged by infected persons defecating or urinating into the water. The eggs hatch into actively motile larvae that penetrate the snails and develop into Cercariae, completing the life cycle of Schistosoma species. Itchiness develops at the penetration site within several days and may be followed by fever, chills, cough, and muscle aches within the next several weeks. Some people don't experience any symptoms in the early stage. The major consequence of schistosomiasis is the damage caused to the liver, intestine, or bladder. Fairly rarely, but possible, schistosoma eggs may migrate into the brain or spinal cord, causing seizures, paralysis, or inflammation of the spinal cord. Diagnosis is confirmed by the presence of schistosoma eggs in the urine or stool. There are safe and effective drugs for treatment, but they're relatively expensive, so only available to certain individuals in some countries. The last section of this chapter talks about fungi. Fungi are a category, again, of eukaryotic microorganisms. This group of microorganisms, though, can be unicellular or multicellular. More than 1 million species of fungi have been identified, and most of these cause no issue to humans. Many fungi have complete, complex life cycles, exhibiting both asexual and sexual stages. Some of these can be, in fact, helpful to humans, such as those that have formed penicillin, as is seen here, or those involved in development of cheeses or other food items. However, remember that this class is all about infectious disease, and so we're going to focus on the types of fungi that can cause disease, including our first type, Stachybotrys chartarum. This is responsible for what's referred to as sick building syndrome, but what I know more of as black mold. It's black and rapidly produces mold capable of growing on the surface of many building materials, including drywall and surface tile. Once it gets into a building, it's very difficult to get rid of and usually requires professional remediation. The various hurricanes that we've had in the United States, including Hurricane Charley in Florida in 2004 and Hurricane Katrina in 2005 that hit Louisiana primarily, resulted in large numbers of cases of this black mold in various buildings. It's not just in hurricanes that this mold can form, however. Leaky and poorly placed gutters, drains, and poor landscaping may also allow seepage of water into buildings and cause the development of this black mold. There are other molds and fungi that can cause diseases in animals. And the first one of these is chytrids. Chytrids cause disease in amphibians, and it has been a leading cause of endangering and causing the extinction of many frogs and toads around the world. Bats are another group of organisms that suffer a cost at the hands of fungi. Geomyces destructans causes white nose syndrome, which can lead to the death of hibernating bats in cold caves in the United States. However, we're going to talk a little bit about fungal diseases in humans in our last and final section of this chapter.